The entire history of the Spanish Empire in 15 minutes. Intro. For over 4 centuries, the Spanish Empire was the most powerful force on Earth. At its peak, it stretched across every inhabited continent, controlled half the world's silver, and ruled over 45 million people. It gave the world the first global currency, the first multinational corporation, and the first truly worldwide war. But it also gave history some of its darkest chapters: the Inquisition, the conquest of entire civilizations, and the transatlantic slave trade at an industrial scale. How did a small kingdom on the edge of Europe become the first empire on which the sun never set? And why did it all come crashing down? That's what we're going to explore today. Chapter 1: The Birth of an Empire. To understand the Spanish Empire, you have to go back to 1492, a year that changed everything. For nearly 8 centuries, the Iberian Peninsula had been fought over by Christian kingdoms and Muslim Moors from North Africa. This centuries-long conflict, known as the Reconquista, forged a warrior aristocracy that was restless, ambitious, and deeply religious. In January of 1492, the last Muslim stronghold of Granada fell to the combined forces of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. For the first time in centuries, a united Christian Spain existed. But Ferdinand and Isabella had a problem. Their warrior nobles were trained for battle, and now there was no one left to fight. They needed a new outlet for all that military energy. And they got one. Enter Christopher Columbus, a Genoese sailor with an idea that everyone else thought was insane. He wanted to reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. Every major European court had rejected him. Portugal said no. England said no. France said no. But Isabella saw opportunity. If Columbus was right, Spain could bypass Portugal's stranglehold on the eastern trade routes and access the wealth of Asia directly. In August of 1492, 3 small ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, set sail from Palos de la Frontera. 2 months later, Columbus made landfall in the Bahamas. He thought he'd reached the Indies. He was wrong. He'd stumbled upon an entirely new world. And that accident would transform Spain from a regional power into a global colossus. Chapter 2: The Age of Conquest. News of Columbus's discovery spread like wildfire. But the Spanish crown quickly realized that the Caribbean islands he'd found were just the beginning. Explorers began pushing further into the Americas, and what they found was staggering. Rumors spread of inland empires made of gold. In 1519, an ambitious and ruthless conquistador named Hernán Cortés set out from Cuba with just 600 men and 16 horses. His mission: to investigate reports of a vast empire in the Mexican interior. That empire was the Aztecs. Ruled by Moctezuma II, the Aztec Empire controlled a population of over 5 million people from their island capital of Tenochtitlan, a city that was larger, cleaner, and more magnificent than anything in Europe. On paper, Cortés had no chance. 600 Spaniards against millions. But Cortés had advantages that the Aztecs couldn't have imagined. Steel swords and armor. Horses, animals that had never existed in the Americas. Gunpowder. Crossbows. And most devastating of all, diseases. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, carried by the Europeans, would kill more indigenous people than any weapon ever could. Cortés also made brilliant use of politics. Thousands of subject peoples who hated Aztec rule, the Tlaxcalans, the Totonacs, joined his forces. By August of 1521, Tenochtitlan had fallen. The Aztec Empire was destroyed. In its place, Spain built New Spain. But Cortés was just the beginning. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro led an even more audacious campaign against the Inca Empire in South America. With just 168 men, he captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa at Cajamarca and held him for ransom. The ransom was a room filled with gold and twice filled with silver, the largest ransom in human history. The Inca paid it anyway. And Pizarro killed Atahualpa anyway. Within a decade, the Inca Empire was gone. Chapter 3: The Golden Age. By the mid-1500s, Spain sat atop the largest empire the world had ever seen. From Mexico to Peru, from California to Argentina, Spanish flags flew over vast territories. But the real wealth wasn't just land, it was silver. In 1545, the Spanish discovered the Cerro Rico, the rich mountain, at Potosí in modern-day Bolivia. It turned out to be the largest silver deposit in the history of the world. At its peak, Potosí produced over half of the world's silver. The mountain was so productive that a Spanish proverb circulated, "Vale un Potosí, it's worth a Potosí," meaning something of extraordinary value. This silver didn't just make Spain rich. It literally created the first global economy. Spanish silver coins, known as pieces of 8, were accepted from Manila to London. Spanish silver financed trade with China, paid for wars across Europe, and became the de facto world currency. So much silver flowed through Spain that it actually caused massive inflation, the first case of what economists call price revolution. Prices across Europe doubled, then tripled. This was globalization before the word existed. Under King Philip II, Spain reached its zenith. From 1556 to 1598, Philip ruled an empire that included not just the Americas, but the Netherlands, southern Italy, the Philippines, and territories in Africa. He built the Escorial, a palace monastery that was the wonder of Europe. He amassed the largest navy the world had ever seen. He was, by any measure, the most powerful man alive. Chapter 4: Power and Persecution. But the Spanish Empire wasn't built only on silver and conquest. It was built on faith, specifically, the aggressive spread of Catholicism. The Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, was one of the most feared institutions in European history. Its purpose was to enforce Catholic orthodoxy, and it did so with terrifying efficiency. Conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity, were suspected of secretly practicing their original faith. They were investigated, tried, and sometimes burned at public ceremonies called autos de fe. In 1492, the same year as Columbus's voyage, Ferdinand and Isabella ordered all Jews who refused to convert to leave Spain entirely. Around 200,000 people were expelled. Later, the same treatment was meted out to the Moriscos, Muslims who had converted to Christianity. The result was a culture of orthodoxy and suspicion that permeated every level of Spanish society. This religious zeal extended into the Americas, where the conversion of indigenous peoples was used to justify conquest. Missionary orders, Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits, followed the conquistadors, building churches and converting populations, sometimes by force. Not everyone in Spain supported this. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Dominican friar, became one of history's first human rights advocates, publishing a short account of the destruction of the Indies to document horrific abuses against indigenous peoples. His testimony led to new laws meant to protect native populations, though enforcement was inconsistent at best. Chapter 5: The Decline. The seeds of Spain's decline were planted even at its peak of power. The fundamental problem was this: Spain extracted staggering wealth from its empire but never developed a productive economy of its own. Instead of building factories or encouraging innovation, the Spanish elite used their new world riches to buy luxury goods from other countries. Silver flowed into Spain and flowed right out again, paying for wars, imports, and debt. Meanwhile, Spain fought constantly. The 80 Years' War against the Dutch rebels in the Netherlands drained treasure and lives for decades. The Anglo-Spanish War saw Spain launch the famous Armada against England in 1588, which ended in catastrophic defeat when storms and English naval tactics destroyed the Spanish fleet. France, the Ottoman Empire, and various Italian states kept Spain fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. And the cost was unsustainable. Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times in the 16th century, in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. This was unheard of for a major power. Each bankruptcy destroyed Spanish credit, raised borrowing costs, and made the next crisis worse. By the 1600s, the decline was accelerating. The 30 Years' War devastated Spain's European territories. Rebellion in Catalonia and Portugal, which had been united with Spain since 1580, further weakened the empire. Portugal broke away in 1640, taking its own colonial empire with it. Spain's population shrank. Its cities emptied. Its once mighty military was a shadow of its former self. Chapter 6: The Slow Fade. The 18th century brought a brief revival under the Bourbon dynasty. New kings from France brought administrative reforms, reorganized the military, and tried to modernize the colonial economy. Spain recovered some of its strength. It fought in the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, and made gains in North America. But the fundamental weaknesses remained. The Napoleonic invasion of 1808 was the catalyst for collapse. When Napoleon put his brother Joseph on the Spanish throne, it triggered a crisis of legitimacy across the empire. In Spain, guerrilla warfare consumed 500,000 French soldiers and gave the English language a new word, guerrilla. In the Americas, colonial elites saw their chance. Independence movements erupted across the continent. Simón Bolívar liberated Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. José de San Martín freed Argentina, Chile, and Peru. Agustín de Iturbide secured Mexican independence. By 1825, Spain had lost virtually its entire American empire. All that remained was Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and a few small Pacific islands. And even those were lost in the Spanish-American War of 1898, when the United States defeated Spain in just 10 weeks. After 4 centuries, the empire on which the sun never set was finally extinguished. Conclusion: the Spanish Empire reshaped the world in ways that are still visible today. Spanish is the second most spoken native language on Earth, with over 400 million speakers. Catholicism in the Americas traces directly to Spanish missions. Cities from Los Angeles to Buenos Aires bear Spanish names in Spanish urban planning. The foods we eat, the music we hear, the borders we recognize all bear the fingerprints of the Spanish Empire. But we cannot forget the cost. Millions of indigenous people died from violence and disease. African slavery fueled the colonial economy for centuries. Incalculable cultural heritage was destroyed. The Spanish Empire was a story of extraordinary ambition, incredible wealth, profound cruelty, and ultimate overreach. It's a story that reminds us that no matter how powerful an empire becomes, if it takes more than it builds, if it rules by force rather than creation, eventually, the bill comes due. The sun set on the Spanish Empire. But its shadow stretches across our world to this day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to Hermes History for a new deep dive every day.